Today we'll be looking at Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective for the Sega CD. This is one of those games that made full use of full motion video footage, a concept that's been around since the 80s in limited form. The earliest example that I know of being the Dragon's Lair arcade game, the one that ran on Laserdiscs. But the idea didn't really hit its zenith until the rise of CD-ROMs in the early 90s, where suddenly a whole bunch of people were doing these video games with actual video of actual actors doing actual acting things or something of that nature. Full motion video or FMV games have something of a conflicted reputation, to put it ever so diplomatically. Some games are of admittedly somewhat decent quality, while others are, well, not so much, to put it ever so diplomatically. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective on the Sega CD is somewhere in the middle. More or less. Let's check it out.
London is not a beautiful city. Under the soot that covers its buildings is a teeming mass of 4 million souls trying to survive, mostly off of each other.
Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective gives you 3 mysteries to solve: the Mummy's Curse, the Tin Soldier, and the Mystified Mistress. Each mystery opens with Holmes and Watson setting up the story, and from there, we move on to the main menu where you have access to your address book, archive of newspaper clippings, and other assorted tools of the trade. This is where you'll be spending most of your time in Consulting Detective, aside from watching the various videos or reading the appropriate texts in order to uncover clues to solve the mystery in progress. From this screen, you could access the London directory, which contains all the locations you can visit, the London Times, where you can read through various editions of the esteemed publication, send one of the Baker Street irregulars to get you information that normal means wouldn't reveal, check your notebook for potential leads, and go to various locations on your carriage. The whole thing is essentially a point-and-click adventure game, except without the adventure. Gameplay primarily revolves around looking at text boxes and watching videos in hopes of uncovering clues that will lead you closer to the solution to the case. And not much else, I'm afraid. The adventure is generally left to the imagination, pens and paper, as you will presumably jot down notes to try and piece together bits and pieces to form something resembling a solution to the riddle that you have been charged to solve. When you have accumulated sufficient evidence to solve the case, and this usually entails visiting a few key suspects vital to the mystery, you can present your findings to the court, where you'll be asked a series of multiple choice questions that will prove your findings. Answer these questions correctly and you'll have solved the case. Answer these questions incorrectly and you're back on the street to try again. Now, while the overall objective is to gather enough clues to solve the mystery, the game's true objective is to do so in the least amount of points. Each move you make in Consulting Detectives nets you 1 point. Going to interview the barkeep regarding some mystery? That's 1 point. Sending for one of the irregulars to look up a person? That's 1 point. Reaching a dead end is 1 point. And the more points you have, the less effective you are at being a detective. When you manage to solve the mystery, you'll get a tally of the number of moves it took you to solve the case. The lower the number, the better. The higher the number, well, quite frankly, the more rubbish you are at your job, so try to do better. From there, it becomes a challenge to determine the approach to solving the case in the fewest number of moves possible, and while that might be an enticing challenge for those looking to improve their scores, for others, it's simply a matter of being one and done and moving on to something else. The big weakness with Consulting Detectives, as well as a good majority of FMV games of this ilk, is its limited replay value. Once you complete all 3 mysteries, there's very little reason to come back for more outside of just watching the videos that play out, which, in all honesty, is not the most ideal thing to do when you're playing this on a Sega CD. This is a very mileage-varying game. Either you're willing to dwell into the sleuth business and invest some time in putting 2 and 2 together through the various bits of media at your disposal, or you're going to give up and follow a walkthrough that will point you in the right direction. Any way you look at it, interactivity in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is minimal at best, and despite the compelling video bits, there's simply not enough meat to truly make it worthwhile for some people. Like I said, there's sufficient pointing and clicking, and it works well enough despite the D-pad control setup, but not so much adventuring. There's nothing in terms of branching paths to steer the interviews or perhaps investigating a location in greater detail. Everything is done from this one screen, and after a while, it does start to feel a bit shallow, and for those who aren't willing to dive in fully or try to achieve a better score, it'll likely be a case of one and done. If even that. Naturally, this being a full-motion video game, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detectives features plenty of full-motion video, and naturally this being on the Sega CD, the video quality is... well, let's see, the screen is a bit too small, there's quite a bit of grain and choppiness, it's not the cleanest looking thing out there. Let's just call it less than stellar and be done with it. Now, in regards to the videos themselves, it's actually not that bad. Mind you, it's entirely possible that I'm being a bit generous in my quote-unquote praise, given that most FFV productions around this time were done fairly cheaply and without much regard, but I found Consulting Detectives' various cinematics to be quite decent for the most part. I mean, the sets looked fairly good, the acting's generally passable fare, not the greatest thing ever, but it's enough to keep me captivated and interested in the story being told. I even like the occasional illustrations inserted into the video depicting the crime scene, as told by the characters. What can I say as far as the video productions are concerned? I enjoyed them quite a bit and I thought they were well done, at least as much as I could see. In terms of the actual gameplay, as it were, you have a fairly basic, somewhat straightforward menu layout that's easy to navigate. When reading the clippings, the type is at the very least clean enough that you could get some semblance of information out of it. Other than that, there's not much else to say. It's neatly organized, I guess. It's not rubbish looking. Got nothing else. The only real weakness in the package is in sound, or rather, the lack of it. A lot of the audio bits comes from the videos and the story unfolding within, and the quality is about as well as you expect from the Sega CD. Not exactly high quality, but still clean enough that it's audible. Outside of that, there's only a handful of sound effects that play during the actual game, mostly occurring when you're clicking on things. Also lacking here is music. There's only a couple jingles that play during some of the videos, so it's a very quiet game, accompanied by the eternal damnation of faint white noise in the background. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a mileage-varying game because it's mostly video and very little in terms of proper gameplay and interactivity. It's the one common complaint among FMV games. They make the video first and then toss a game around it later. In this case, you're just clicking on icons and lines of text to bring up videos or pieces of text to read. So the whole thing is more of a mental exercise that you have to piece together, and if that is not your cup of tea, then this will not appeal to you in the slightest. This kind of game skews towards a more specific audience, as it were, the kind that does enjoy this sort of mystery-solving escapade. That having been said, I did enjoy my time spent on Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Mind you, most of the enjoyment came from watching the video performances and not so much the sub-bare-bones gameplay that feels less like playing a game and more like navigating files and windows, but yeah, I liked watching the videos. I thought they were well done. So much so that I ended up getting the Steam version of these 3 cases where they have much nicer looking video quality and mouse control, and that's probably the version I recommend playing if you want to give this game a shot. Again, that's a very big if. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is for those who enjoy solving mysteries by gathering clues, reading texts, and just putting things together, and if that suits your fancy, then knock yourself out. Just don't do it on the Sega CD. Go for the Steam version, which is about $5 for all 3 cases or something, so, yeah, we're done.